Hello everyone. I want to welcome you to today's webinar, Unlocking Cash from the Financial Supply Chain and Assessing the Size of the Prize. The title is a bit of a teaser, and we'll have more details to come throughout the presentation. My name is Joe Hyland. I'm the Vice President of Marketing here at Taulia, and I'm joined by Pete Laughlin, Managing Editor of Purchasing Insight. All right, so quickly, what we're going to cover today. He's going to talk about the global e-invoicing market and kind of take us through a graphical depiction of different regions of the world and their adoption of electronic invoicing. We're going to talk about a tipping point that we're reaching, and we may have already passed. Kind of more to come on that, but it involves the adoption of electronic invoicing and how it impacts discount capture for suppliers. We're going to talk about releasing cash from the financial supply chain. This is becoming an important driver for change and how this relates to what I'll call the never-ending battle between accounts receivable and accounts payable. One group wanting to get paid faster, another group seemingly trying to push out payment terms, and we'll analyze if that still makes sense given today's interest rate environment. We'll go through the innovative financial supply chain model and how organizations can create a win-win for themselves and also their supply base. And kind of lastly, moving from an antiquated discounting model to a dynamic discounting model. What that means, what it can mean for your organization, and the types of returns you can expect. So with that, I will turn things over to Pete, and he can walk us through the world map of e-invoicing.
Thanks for that, Joe. About just over a year ago, actually, I was looking for some information that would describe what I thought of as the kind of global landscape for e-invoicing, something that would describe what e-invoicing means in different parts of the world in terms of, take-up, adoption, maturity, legal compliance, and so on. I didn't find that single source of information. It was actually quite difficult to find, so I had to create it. And we did some research on e-invoicing around the globe, and we discovered that there are 4 distinct regions in the world that share characteristics as far as e-invoicing is concerned. There's North America, Europe, and Australia, and New Zealand. There's Latin America, Asia Pacific, and Middle East and Africa, all of whom share kind of similar characteristics. And if we look at, first of all, North America, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand, the kinds of characteristics that they share are certainly at a level of maturity. There's wide adoption of electronic invoicing in these regions, and certainly from a legal point of view, electronic invoicing is allowed. There are differences. In North America, there are only 2 languages, English and French. In Australia and New Zealand, there's only 2 languages, English and Maori. In Europe, there's 23 languages, and they're just the official ones. There's actually more e-invoicing standards in Europe than there are languages spoken. So it's mature, but also diverse. If we look at the next region, which is Latin America, Latin America is really quite special from an e-invoicing point of view. Well, some people would describe parts of Latin America as the developing world. From an electronic invoicing point of view, they're really taking the lead. Various governments, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, have mandated the use of electronic invoicing, which has created a very rapid growth in its uptake. Mandated not just because of, or rather not because of the efficiencies that it delivers, but actually mandated to help governments prevent tax fraud. So a very different approach and a very fast-moving environment. The next region is Asia Pacific. quite different really. In many cases, e-invoicing just isn't legally allowed. In other countries, it absolutely is. So, characterized by rapid change and diverse approach to e-invoicing. And finally, Africa and the Middle East. The only thing stopping Africa and the Middle East from adopting electronic invoicing widely is infrastructure. But that's changing very, very rapidly. It's interesting that in Africa, in some parts of Africa, where people still have to walk 5 kilometers to fetch water, they can still get a mobile phone signal. So, the technical infrastructure in Africa is growing very rapidly, and we'll see that change. But one of the things about the world map of e-invoicing, although that study is only 12 months old, it's already looking out of date because the rate of change is enormous. And that rate of change kind of begs the question, are we reaching, or have we reached a tipping point? Now, most people aren't familiar with the academic study on the diffusions of innovations, but we are all very familiar with the language that academic study produced. So the diffusion of innovations, an academic study that started in the 60s, has proved extremely useful in describing the evolution and the take-up of various technologies. And we see this curve that most people are familiar with. We start off with the innovators, the risk takers, who take up new technology, followed by the early adopters, again late to start but still risk takers, and that's before the majority, first of all the early majority and late majority, followed by the laggards, the people who have to be dragged kicking and screaming into the modern age. And there's a point just near, between the early adopters and the early majority, that's the point of no return, the point at which there is so much general acceptance of a new technology that it's bound to be successful, and that's referred to as the tipping point. Marketers also refer to a thing called a chasm, which is the point between early adopters and the early majority. Many technologies reach this point where there seems to be this chasm after the early adopters. And there's a question, are we ever going to cross that chasm? Well, I think from the research that will be published in the next few weeks, we can see that we're very likely to have already reached that tipping point in e-invoicing. And that has a very significant insight, that research gives us a very significant insight into the importance of supply chain finance and in particular dynamic discounting. So I'll explain a little bit about this research. The research is performed jointly between Purchasing Insight and PayStream Advisors. It looked at a wide range of industries, 200 companies from a wide range of industries. It is also genuinely global. If we look at the next slide, we can see that each region of the world is represented fully. And also lots of, wide variety of different sizes of organisations, from a large number of smallish organisations, but a fair amount of very large organisations and everything in between also. One of the first questions that was asked in this survey was about existing volumes. What percentage of invoices are already received electronically? And the vast majority of respondents said less than 10%. These are organisations that haven't really begun an e-invoicing program or are at very early stages. And a very small minority, only 5%, are at a stage where they're receiving greater than 75%. But then we asked about aspirations. What do you plan to do in the next 12 months? Despite the huge number that are only just embarking on electronic invoicing, and despite the tiny proportion that are achieving greater than 75%, 37% want to achieve a very high number of e-invoicing, or a very high proportion of electronic invoices. Now, the most obvious interpretation of this is that when a company is embarking on a project, they're perhaps naive and over-ambitious. No one plans to fail. So it could be that everyone wants to get to 100%, a worthy goal, but not very realistic. But the next insight that came from the research, or one of the insights that came from the research, tells a different story. When we asked about purchase-to-pay priorities, we asked about all of the purchase-to-pay initiatives that might be undertaken. By a long way, electronic invoicing was seen as the most important, much more important than automated workflow, purchasing cards, electronic payments. And then we looked at the e-invoicing drivers. Why do organizations want to embark on electronic invoicing? And we dug down into some detail here, and this is where the key insight emerged. We asked the question, of all of the drivers for initiating electronic invoicing, is cash management, is discounting one of those drivers? And the organisations that said, indeed it is, fell into two categories. There were those organisations that already achieved more than 75% electronic invoicing, and that's not surprising. They've already, they're approaching the end of their implementation program. They're already seeing the process benefits of e-invoicing. Now they want to go to the next stage. Now that they're able to pay efficiently, they want to be able to extract value from that by doing clever things with their cash. Things like getting discounts in return for early payments. But the next group that stood out as being driven by cash management to implement electronic invoicing were those organisations doing less than 10%. Those embarking are just planning to embark on an e-invoicing program. And that tells us something very interesting. It's not just naive ambition that is driving these new projects. It's becoming accepted wisdom now that cash management, supply chain finance, dynamic discounting is seen as the real prize for implementing purchase-to-pay technology, and especially e-invoicing. But we need to take a reality check. Dynamic discounting, or discounting in general, isn't new. The idea of asking for a trade, a discount in return for early payment has been used in the past. It's a great idea, certainly in theory, but the reality is suppliers are actually very suspicious. They've been here before, and they've offered discounts for early payment, but but going forward, they've continued to offer the discount, but the early payment hasn't happened, perhaps because customers simply aren't in a position to pay early. And not all suppliers will discount. Maybe they don't need to. Maybe they're financially stronger than their customers. So it doesn't work all the time. Not all buyers have a strong negotiating hand. And you don't actually know what discounts to demand in return for early payment. Is a 2% discount for 30 days early payment appropriate, or should it be 4% discount? Or would it be only 2% for 60 days early payment? And this creates a real problem, because if you're to build a business case, you have to know which suppliers, which categories you're going to get discounts from, and what size they should be. So the case for discounting seems compelling, but building the business case is the challenge. And that's why we've developed a simple methodology for calculating the cash locked within the financial supply chain. I just want to explain this in a few brief slides. The first step in this methodology is to perform a spend analysis. So the chart you can see, each bar represents a category of spend. And as you would expect, it's ordered by value, and as you would expect, you can see that most spend is with a small number of suppliers and with a large supplier tail. The next stage of the methodology is to perform a DPO analysis. So DPO, days payable outstanding, it's really a measure of how long a customer holds on to the supplier's payment. And we do this analysis again by the same categories. So category by category, we look at how long it takes to pay suppliers in that industry. The next step is the key step. This is where we use what we call financial supply chain benchmarks. So we already have an analysis of spend by category. We know how much is spent by category. We know how long it takes to pay by category, but the financial supply chain benchmarks tell us on average, by category, what kind of discounts we can expect for early payment. This is actually a measure of the cost of working capital in various industries. But combining those three pieces of information allows us to identify how much cash is locked in the financial supply chain. So if we look at the final analysis, the final summary, combining this information gives us, including margins of error, because the benchmarks aren't all as accurate as each other, it gives us an estimate of how much cash could be released if we were to use discounting. And in the case of this example, we've got an estimate of somewhere between $2 and $3 million is actually locked away. That represents, in this case, somewhere between 1 and 1.5% of the total value of spend. Now, it's not necessarily, we're not necessarily going to be able to capture all of that spend. Not every supplier will take a discount all of the time. But it's really important to understand, by not taking advantage of discounting, how much cash is remaining locked in the supply chain that could be otherwise deployed.
Hey Pete, that's really that's a great point. The last point you ended on is companies kind of leaving money on the table with not capturing all the supplier discounts they can. It's interesting. We've seen so many areas within supply chain management and how organizations manage their supply base. So much of that has been automated, but the financial supply chain is the last, almost what I'd call the last pillar of automation. It's where organizations are saving millions of dollars a year because their suppliers are hungry for cash. They're hungry for liquidity. So just really quickly on Taulia's experience, I won't spend long on this slide. We've been doing this for years. We're focused on helping organizations unlock this cash that's tied up within the supply chain. It's just what Pete said. Organizations from Pfizer to Coca-Cola bottling to PG&E to John Deere, helping these companies kind of automate their order-to-pay processes, getting invoices in faster, getting them in electronically, getting them approved, and getting them available for early payment discounts. Right? That's really the name of the game. Okay, so there's kind of a different way of evaluating discounts, and I'll walk through this pretty quickly. I simplify this by saying there's the antiquated discounting model, which I'll talk more about. And then there's the new age innovative model, which is really dynamic discounting. So discounting is no longer a great idea in theory. Pete talked about this. It's also a reality, right? And we'll walk through a couple customer case studies to show you how those organizations are using it, are using discounts really to get a win-win out of their supply chain. So win for the buying organization because you get better return on your cash. You're capturing more discounts. And for the suppliers, they're getting faster, easier, more convenient access to much needed cash. Okay, so there's a fundamental inefficiency in the supply chain, and what I mean by that is pushing out days payable outstanding, extending DPO made sense in the late 70s and early 80s. right? Interest rates were up near 20%. For a few months, they were over 20%. So holding on to your cash for a few extra days, maybe an extra month, that paid dividends, right? That paid nice returns. But does it really make sense in today's interest rate environment? So take that one kind of nugget and hold it off to the side, and then also compare it to the amount of cash that organizations are sitting on. Talk about a great problem to have. I mean, if you're Apple sitting on $110 billion in cash, that's a nice challenge. But it is just that. It is a challenge for Treasury departments. It is not easy to get a return on this investment in a risk-free manner that gives you positive results, right? So Apple, as an example, last year earned 75 basis points on their cash. They have more of it than anyone, yet they couldn't exceed 1%. Well, why is that? Interest rates are so low. So as companies are sitting on more and more cash, interest rates are next to nothing. Is there a better way to manage your money? And our clients think that there is. So if we kind of quickly look at the current invoicing and payment process, you can pretty quickly see there's a fundamental flaw. So in this case, if we start in the upper right-hand corner, your supplier gives you a good or service, and for that they submit an invoice. So in this case, let's just say it's a net 60 invoice. And in this example, we'll assume that you do not have early payment discount terms set up with this supplier. So just for argument's sake, on day 5, you have kind of received the invoice and it's gone through your workflow, and hooray, it has now been approved. So it is due in 55 days. So just as you in your personal life would not pay your credit card bill any earlier, AP departments aren't paying the invoices any earlier than the due date. So in that case, this large buying organization, you in this case, you sit on that invoice for 55 days because you earn great interest, right? You're getting a great return on that money. Well, maybe not. Like again, back in the early 80s, you were. Today, maybe you're earning 50 basis points. You're earning 0.5% on that money if you're fortunate. So it sits in a bank account for 55 days, and you earn a very modest return. Meanwhile, that kind of sits in the bank, of course. And meanwhile, your suppliers, they're hungry for cash. Maybe they have payroll coming up, or they've got a big order that they need to fulfill. They're also going out to that bank or to their bank and either factoring their receivables or taking a short-term loan. In this case, we're calling it a 20% APR. That's probably being more than generous. It's very likely significantly higher. So in this case, the bank's really the big winner. The bank's getting a return on your money, so the bank is making money that you've got sitting in a money market account. Your supplier, of course, has to go out to their bank to take a short-term loan. What if there was a way to cut out that middleman? And we'll talk about how you can. Pete's already alluded to it. So kind of at a macro level, if we come in and look at the world from a supplier's perspective, and we view their pain points, they're pretty simple. Suppliers want to know from their customers, hey, did you receive my invoice? When will you be able to pay me? When's that invoice going to be approved for payment? And hey, is there a chance you can pay me any earlier? Right? That's what they want. They've got cash forecasting. They've got liquidity needs. Those are their pain points. That's what they're curious about. From your perspective, from the buying organization's perspective, our supplier inquiry calls taking up valuable time. The organizations we work with, before they implement a better solution, the answer to this one is yes. Suppliers are confused on the status of the invoice. They're unsure if it's been received, so they do what you and I would do in that case, which is they pick up the phone and they call the AP department, right? They call their customer. What about discount opportunities? Are discount opportunities being missed? As Pete alluded to before, are you leaving money on the table by missing opportunities to pay your suppliers earlier, but pay them less? And kind of in that spirit, are there better ways to optimize your working capital? That's what our customers see as their day-to-day challenge, and that's what Taulia does. That's what we help to address. We help solve those problems for buying organizations. So I like this slide because it's an interesting juxtaposition between two trading partners that, if you look at it in simplistic terms, kind of have competing interests. But do they really? So there's a never-ending battle between the buying organization and their suppliers, between AP and AR. This friction within the supply chain. Buying organizations, because of the interest that can be earned on a payment float or extending out DPO, they don't want to pay early. As a matter of fact, they want to pay as late as possible. Meanwhile, suppliers want to push in that due date. They want to get paid earlier, and they're oftentimes willing to give a discount for this. So I call this solving the what-if game. What if suppliers could see the status of their invoices 24/7, right? So they didn't have a need to pick up the phone and call and ask. What if your suppliers could incentivize early payments? What if they were willing to give you a discount that is to be paid earlier? In our experience, they are. Kind of lastly, what if you could pay your suppliers less and they would thank you? Right? 'Cause there are solutions out there that allow this, and that's the purpose of this webinar. That's the purpose of what we do with our clients is to create a win-win within their supply chain. Okay, and so bringing this all together, how is this achieved? I talked earlier about antiquated discounting versus dynamic discounting. What does that really mean? Well, listen, there are very kind of familiar early payment terms that we're all accustomed to. 2/10 net 30 just being one example. If I pay within 10 days on a 30-day invoice, you as a supplier will give me a 2% discount. Sure, everyone understands that, but that's pretty rigid, and it really doesn't leave organizations open towards maximizing discount capture. What about invoices that are approved faster than 10 days? Can I get a larger discount? Meaning, if I have, in that earlier example, if I had a discount an invoice that was approved on day 5, could I capture a discount that's larger than 2%, assuming it was on a net 30 invoice? Yeah, I think that's possible. What about, again, in the same example, for a net 30 invoice? What about if the supplier decides on day 27 that they need access to cash? I gave examples before as to why that might happen. They've got a big order coming in that they need to fulfill. They've got payroll coming. So they're only 10%. They're 3 days away from getting paid on time. But if they're willing to give a small discount, is that a discount you're willing to capture? I think most organizations would say yes, it is. So it's not an overly complex theory, but having a sliding scale discount program that allows suppliers to opt to get paid the moment an invoice is approved has tremendous benefits and tremendous cost savings potential. And kind of here's just a quick snapshot of what that could look like. So in this case, if an invoice is due on December 6th in this example, and the supplier wants to be paid earlier, well, you as the buying organization have the ability to set the discount rate. So you set an annualized rate of return that varies, that changes dynamically, if you will, based off the number of days early it is paid. Right? So a supplier can go in and can select, in this case, maybe it's November 5th, and they see that the discount is 0.938%. If that percentage was too steep, they could select a different date, and the discount would automatically change. So it allows the supplier to get easier, faster, more convenient access to cash with a click of a button. You as a buying organization have all the control. You set what the rate of return is that you desire, and the supplier determines if they want to accept that discount or not. Simple as that. If the discount is too steep, or the supplier says, that's okay, I'm fine with getting paid on day 30, or in this case, day 60, no problem, they do nothing. But if they decide to get paid earlier, they click a button, and the solution automatically changes the posting date, changes the payment date within your ERP. So it can be that easy, and that's how we work with our customers to help save them, truthfully, millions of dollars annually on their discount capture. So again, the dynamic discounting, we've talked about it representing a win-win. It's pretty simple. It's better returns for you as a buyer, better returns on your cash, and the suppliers get easier, faster, more convenient access to cash. Better rates, simpler process than going out and factoring their receivables. And again, suppliers choose if they want the solution. If they don't want it, they just do nothing. Okay, so I'm just going to take a moment to talk about some of the other cost savings that can be achieved. So at the onset of the presentation, Pete talked about electronic invoicing being a driver for discount capture. That's what we've seen with a lot of our customers as well. There are hard savings that can be attained through an electronic invoicing and a discount management solution. We'll talk more about those when we go through a couple of success stories. You know, I alluded to it a moment ago when I talked about organizations being able to save millions on their AP spend and by capturing more discounts. But let's look at another way that you can save money, because increasing automation and increasing efficiency within your AP department is not something to be discounted, if you will. AP departments have kind of a host of activities that really can be burdensome. So everything from doing online dispute management, which truthfully isn't online if you don't have an electronic invoicing or discount management solution. If a supplier has a problem with a purchase order or there's an issue with an invoice, there's no electronic portal if you don't have a solution, of course. So they pick up the phone and they call your accounts payable department, and they deal with it manually. They say, you know, this line item's wrong, or I should have been paid more, or you captured a discount when you shouldn't have. You know, you took a 2% discount, but I noticed you didn't pay me on day 10. You still paid me on day 30. That can take up a lot of time within an accounts payable organization. Providing invoice status, online payment advice, remittance information. Again, without an electronic solution, without a supplier-facing portal, these calls come right into your accounts payable department, and they cost money. So in this case, without walking through all the numbers, we estimate, based off of studies we've conducted with our customer base, that nearly a 25% savings can be attained just on time savings, being able to allocate your resources more intelligently, kind of reassign them to more strategic initiatives. And again, if you look at these just four categories we have: supplier inquiries, supplier maintenance, updating vendor master files, right? So if your supplier changes their bank account information or they change their mailing address, most organizations today, that involves the supplier picking up the phone, calling your accounts payable department to speak with a payroll, to speak with an accounts payable administrator to change that information manually. What about exception handling? Being able to handle disputes electronically tied into your ERP, in this case SAP, is valuable. That saves organizations a significant amount of time. So electronic invoicing that works. Pete did a great job at the start of the presentation talking about e-invoicing as a driver for other initiatives, most notably dynamic discounting or discount management, being able to capture more supplier discounts. Well, there's a lot of hurdles within an electronic invoicing program or process that need to be cleared. What we've found working with our customer base, what we've seen as the most kind of successful programs are those programs that eliminate barriers, right? So a supplier management or a discount management and electronic invoicing process only works if your suppliers adopt. So you know, we've worked with companies that have tried these initiatives in the past and kind of been unsuccessful because the barriers to entry were too steep. One of which was on transaction fees. So we've worked with companies that in the past, when they've tried these programs, have said, hey, we're going to put the burden of cost on our suppliers, meaning suppliers are going to get charged a transaction fee. That, as we've seen it in working with our customers, has not worked, has not been successful, mainly because suppliers are kind of reluctant to adopt a solution that's going to cost them money. If you think about it from their perspective, a supplier is a company. They have a business and they have customers. They have an invoicing process already. So though there are benefits to an electronic invoicing solution, namely that it's a huge time savings for the supplier, they don't have to pick up the phone and call you to ask for the status of an invoice, right? So that's easier for them. It's easier for them to look at this stuff online, become self-sufficient and answer their own questions. Also being able to have faster access to cash, better lending terms than they would get from their bank. So those two benefits right there, we have found with our customers and the companies we work with, are significant enough for suppliers to adopt. But again, it has to be the right model. It has to be an e-invoicing methodology that works for you, but also works for the suppliers so that they ultimately adopt. So with that, I think Pete's going to jump back in and kind of walk through an example of how the math works on an early payment program. Right? So what this discount management looks like, and how companies can save millions in additional discount capture.
Okay, thanks, Joe. And we're going to take as an example the $12 billion spend organization. Now, as we discussed before, not all of that spend will be fully addressable. We won't have 100% take-up of the portal, and even those suppliers that do choose to take part in discounting won't necessarily do that with all of their invoices. So we've got some assumptions here about a 65% portal adoption, and 18% of that addressable spend will be accelerated. So from 12 billion, we've got 1.4 billion pound spend that we can do really good stuff with. So if we think of this 1.4 billion as a short-term investment, and the interest rate that we want to achieve is 16%. So we want to get 16% return on our cash as a buyer. And let's say on average, across all of the spend that's being accelerated, we get it's accelerated by 30 days. So it could be payment terms were normally 60 days, another 30, or it could be moving from 90 to 60. To work out how much of a discount, it's a relatively simple calculation. The 16% is in annual terms, so to work out what that is for just 30 days, divide that by 360 multiplied by 30, and I think you'll get something like 1.33%. 1.33% of 1.4 billion is 18.7 million. So that's the incremental discount, 18.7 million. That represents, in annual terms, 16% return on 1.4 billion. The next important figure in this chart is working capital, 117 million. Excuse me. 117 million represents effectively the working capital impact in order to achieve this kind of this level of discount. If you imagine if there's a pot of money that you have, which is your working capital, after this using this calculation, you have to reduce the size of that pot by 117 million. But in so doing, you're getting a return of 18.7 million on that working capital that you've deployed into the discounting scheme, which at 16% return kind of makes sense. So if you actually look at the cost in the first year of this discounting scheme, and you take into account the discounts as well, we're talking about a working capital impact of just £98.3 million.
And
that's how the arithmetic works around those figures.
Pete, that was really helpful, because it's one thing to talk at a macro level about organizations being able to shed millions of dollars off their AP spend and capture millions of dollars of additional discounts. But I think for those mathematically inclined folks who are listening, or people within Treasury or Accounts Payable or Finance, it's nice to see the math behind it. And what's great about these programs that we've been talking about for the past 45 minutes is you as a buying organization set up the APR, right? So in this case, 16% is relatively conservative. And you as a buying organization kind of have that power to set a rate of return that works for you, right? With that, let's go into a couple of case studies. So these are Taulia customers, just for full disclosure. But they're Taulia customers that Pete interviewed for a white paper that he drafted about a month ago on kind of optimizing the supply chain, optimizing the financial supply chain. So, kind of in the first example, we'll talk about Coca-Cola bottling is using what we call innovative dynamic discounting through Taulia as a key procurement tool to unlock cash from the financial supply chain. And kind of what did that look like? So from an electronic invoicing perspective, 90% of their suppliers onboarded. 55% of their suppliers were onboarded in less than a month. You see the quote up here from Marsha Golden, the Director of Accounts Payable at Coca-Cola Bottling. Without reading the entire thing, you can see that it's been a successful program, and they're ecstatic with it. Having it tied directly into SAP just kind of gave them the perfect seamless integration that they were looking for. I talked earlier about the benefits of streamlining accounts payable, but those are real benefits. So we've been talking about hard dollar cost savings throughout much of the presentation, but look what Coca-Cola Bottling was able to do. Through attrition, as people either retired or left, they were able to eliminate 1.5 headcounts, 1.5 full-time equivalent resources within their accounts payable organization, just because they're so much more efficient now. Because suppliers have the ability to do online dispute resolution, see the status of the invoice, know when it's going to get approved, and then determine if they would like to get paid earlier. That's kind of 3 or 4 reasons for a supplier to not pick up the phone and call Coca-Cola Bottling. That's just allowed their accounts payable department to run that much more efficiently. Yeah, I don't know if you have any additional insights from the discussions that you had with Marsha that you want to chime in on.
Yeah, what I was really impressed about with Coca-Cola Bottling, this program actually didn't start off as a discounting program at all. It started off as a program to eliminate paper from the payables process. But it's now turned around, and discounting and the return on discounting is now the key driver, which is fascinating. The other thing that is really interesting is that Coca-Cola actually share the benefits with their suppliers. So now they can share the benefits and incentivize their suppliers to do other cool things like send electronic payment or send electronic invoicing, in return for a share of the benefits. And because of that, procurement in Coca-Cola absolutely love this scheme.
Yeah, those are great points, and it's and that's just in line with what we've seen in the market and what you and I have been talking about. Using electronic invoicing, getting rid of paper from the payables process as a driver for discount capture, right? And that's what we're seeing at Coca-Cola bottling. So the second client that Pete talked to was another Taulia customer, Dominion Resources, one of the largest utility companies in the United States, and they've seen tremendous cost savings and just tremendous success from their dynamic discounting program. The kind of almost an instantaneous return on investment in under 3 months. Kind of they're proud to say. The cost savings for them, you see this quote at the bottom from Rob Locke, Director of Strategic Sourcing at Dominion. Cost savings have been a huge driver, and they've just begun. So in the first 3 months of the program, they realized almost $200,000 of additional discount capture. They were pleasantly surprised by the savings. It was in line with what we had projected, but I think they kind of took a we'll wait and see approach, and they're on pace to save $1.5 million to $2 million. This is just in year one. So another interesting point. This chart, of course, shows the onboarding success. So Dominion suppliers love it. They love the program. It's free for the suppliers. They have quicker access to cash. This little quote box on the right-hand side, or the fact box on the right-hand side, shows that almost 10% of Dominion suppliers have automatically accepted early payment discounts. And what that means is, within our solution, if a supplier, or when a supplier, I should say, accepts an early payment discount, they are asked a question, and their question is, would you like to auto-accept all future discounts? And so nearly 10% of Dominion suppliers have said yes. The moment an invoice has been paid, automatically pay me. Right? So again, the control is always in the buying organization. So the buying organization sets the rate of return. So they set an APR that they would like to get. And as long as they have sufficient cash to fund a program, which Dominion does because the returns are so great, the moment that invoice is approved, it goes through for an early payment discount because, or to these 10% of suppliers, because they've said, you know what, this just makes sense. Getting faster access to cash is something we want to automatically happen. I want that to be the default as opposed to managing that by exception. So it just, that's helped drive these cost savings, and it's also improved supplier relations. These suppliers are ecstatic. So I talked earlier about it's an interesting scenario when you can pay your suppliers less and they're happier, but this is a real life example of how that works. Pete, I'm not sure if you have some additional insights in your conversation you had with Rob Locke and Dominion. Three words really: return on investment. I think the thing that was very impressive about this was, for such a small initial investment in the implementation, there was such a rapid return in terms of cash. I think, I mean, Dominion uses SAP, and one of the great things about the Taulia solution is it's a native SAP application. So implementation is a walk in the park, and as a result is very inexpensive. Yeah, that's a great point. You know, where we Taulia, that is, are kind of native to SAP. So another benefit for both Coke and Dominion from their users' perspective within accounts payable and procurement. They're familiar with SAP. It's kind of the application that they're within every day, and Taulia sits within SAP. So there's really no change management. In the supplier side, it's a SaaS portal, very easy to use, and kind of accessible anywhere you have an internet connection. So kind of helps on the convenience side for the suppliers, which again helps on their use. So kind of with that, we're going to wrap up our presentation, and I guess I'll close with what I would call a visionary statement. What we've heard from our customers and the organizations that we work with on automating accounts payable, they say to us, I mean, these are their words, not ours. We just put it into a slide. You know, hey Joe, if I could have a world where supplier inquiry calls just go away or they're minimized, they become a thing of the past only when they're absolutely necessary. This solution also allowed me to maximize supplier discounts and automate them, because again, it's one thing to, if you have 100 or 200 suppliers, maybe even 500 or 1,000, you can kind of manually put together a program that helps maximize discount capture. But when you're a larger organization and you have tens, if not 20,000, 30,000 suppliers, you need something that scales, and you need it to automate, and that's what the Taulia solution kind of provides. It provides a lean invoicing and payables process that helps you capture as many supplier discounts as possible. So that's the world we want you to envision. And if you talk to our customers or customers that use this solution, I think it's very attainable. So with that, we'll wrap up the presentation. There's actually, we've kind of run through our allotted amount of time. Here's Pete's and my contact information. Please reach out to us. We'd be happy to answer more questions. And with that, I want to thank everyone for the time. I want to thank you, Pete. I hope this was an informational gathering webinar for everyone. And well, thank you again.